everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm recording on a Friday night here in Reykjavik, Iceland, and I had a plan for this week's episode. I was thinking, looking at the release schedule for the last month, this would be the week when I would review Venba, a game that I've been looking forward to since it was first revealed. It is the visual novel about Indian immigrants in Canada, in which you go through their life story and you cook. There is a cooking mini-game, and it's a little bit about cooking and the meaning of cooking, whether it's to care for someone, whether it's cooking for children or a loved one, or making an old recipe that has been passed down. I really like the idea of this game about the importance of food culturally and emotionally and all of that stuff. So I started playing Venba. It's really cool. I enjoyed what I played of it. It's a short game, but I would say that Venba is like a visual novel style game, which I'm here for, absolutely, but I think you need to be in a certain mood to settle down with a visual novel and give it your full attention. You need to have a quiet mind and be in a patient, slow kind of mood, or at least I do. And that's not the mood I was in this week, so I ended up playing a whole bunch of other stuff. Quite a varied, mixed bag. Quite a bit of retro game stuff, actually. So I think what I'm going to do this episode, rather than reviewing Venba, I'm going to defer that review and do it later. And this week it's just going to be a roundup of some of the stuff that I played. I played a little bit of Axiom Verge, a Metroidvania that people have been telling me to play for years. I finally played an hour of that. I dipped into the Nintendo Online catalogue and played some Super Nintendo classics, which gave me some thoughts about game preservation and how that works and that sort of thing. So I'll talk a little bit around that as well. I also played a little bit of Prodeus on the Xbox. This is a Doom-inspired retro shooter, and I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, to the point where I actually downloaded Doom 64 on my Switch just to see how it compares. So I've got some interesting thoughts about that as well, about what Prodeus is, how it compares to the original games, and how remakes and reboots and reworkings and reimaginings, and in this case tributes, how that all clicks together in our minds. And finally, some of the music that we are listening to right now is from a game called Cloud Gardens that I reviewed a couple years ago. It came out on Switch last year. I bought it on sale, and I've been replaying Cloud Gardens, and I've actually gone further into it now than I did in my original playthrough. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Cloud Gardens as well. So it's another grab bag kind of episode. But first of all, before we get into all that stuff, I've got a few games that I've added to the slate. So a few codes came through this week for games that are coming up soon. The first one is for a game called Engard. This is like a third-person swashbuckling fencing game inspired by things like The Three Musketeers and Zorro and The Princess Bride. It looks very fun. There is kind of a bravado system where you get extra credit for finishing with style, and it looks quite cinematic and playful. So I got a Steam code for that one. I'm looking forward to digging into that. Also got a code for Blasphemous 2, which is coming up later this month. This is a gothic 2D pixel art Metroidvania sequel. The first game is very highly rated. It's got a bit of a difficult game reputation. I think there's a bit of Souls influence in there. I played a little bit of the first game, quite enjoyed it, bounced off it because of difficulty, basically, but I am curious to see how the sequel evolves the formula. And finally, I got a promo for a game called Shotgun King. This is a really funny game. It's a turn-based roguelike, loosely based on chess, but the twist here is that you play as the Black King gone rogue. All your army is gone, it's just the Black King versus the White Hordes, and the Black King has a shotgun. He is the Shotgun King. So it's chess reimagined if you were fighting as the Black King alone with a shotgun. I've been playing a bit of that one. I've been loving it. That's getting a console release later this month. So it's fun to have a few new things to play, a few new things to try. And I'll be talking more about those as I play more of them and as the embargoes lift later this month. But speaking of this month, it is the start of August, and so it's time to go through the August releases. We've got 23 games here in the Gaming in the Wild release spreadsheet, which is kind of a group effort. I think several people chip into this because there is so much gaming news and there are so many games out there. And there is no real definitive list of them. I sometimes look at IGN and GameSpot and a few other websites, but they focus on the big ones, and some of the small ones fall between the cracks. So it's really fun to have this patron community spreadsheet that we all chip into together. So let's go through a few of the games. I'm recording on the 4th of August, so some of these are already out. So on the 2nd, a game called Adore came out by Cadabra Games. It's on PC and all the consoles. It's a monster taming action roguelite with a bit of a visual influence from Hades. That one is published by Cubi Interactive. Also on the 2nd, a game called Word Factory came out, factory spelt with an I, by Star Garden Games. This is only on PC, but it was in the Wholesome Direct. It looks like Factorio plus Wordle, where you're using factories and conveyor belts to move letters around and form words. They describe it as a word game for engineers. It looks kind of visually striking, actually. I've not seen anything quite like that one. That's Word Factory. Also out now, this one came out only yesterday as I'm recording, a Guidebook of Babel, or Babel, depending on how you want to say it, by Starry, and published by Pixmane. This one came out for Switch, Mac and PC. It's a choice-based adventure game with branching paths based on the butterfly effect, based in the afterlife as well. It's got a really nice, naive storybook, kind of hand-drawn look to it. It looks kind of interesting. I love a good choice-based game. Also on the 3rd, Flutter Away came out. This is a chill, lo-fi walking and photography game that was in the Wholesome Direct. They describe it as a short nature exploration game set in a cozy nook of the Amazon rainforest. Play as a butterfly researcher. I actually have a friend called Angela who is a listener of the show and a patron of the show. And I think this is the perfect game for her as someone that is very interested in butterflies and research and all of that stuff. It's a very cozy looking walking game about nature. On the 7th, Wrestlequest is coming out. This one's been getting a little bit of hype. For some reason, there is a huge crossover, especially on Twitter, between gamers and wrestling fans. I haven't watched wrestling since I was a teenager, but WrestleQuest stars Macho Man Randy Savage, who I remember from back in the day. He must be getting on by now, man. And it's a wrestling game and an RPG fantasy game, colliding, basically. So you're going to have RPG elements and wrestling too. There is some hype about that one. WrestleQuest out on the 7th. On the 10th, Stray Gods is coming out. I'm interested in this one. It's a choice-based visual novel musical. I believe Austin Wintory contributed to the soundtrack, and a whole lot of other people, actually. This is by Summerfall Studios and published by Humble. It's coming out on PC and all the consoles. I'm curious about it, but I'm also I'm wondering where the reviews are going to come down, because as gamers, I think we are all quite used to skipping through dialogue or speed reading dialogue to get back to the game. But this is a visual novel, so there is no skipping dialogue here. If it's a musical, you're going to be listening to those words. I'm curious how that plays out in terms of the game experience. But I think a musical novel of this type hasn't been done before, so Stray Gods out on the 10th. Also on the 10th, Stray is finally coming to Xbox. I tried to play a Stray the other day and was sad to see that it has now been removed from the PlayStation Plus service. It was one of the big PS Plus games. There have only been a couple of day one releases, and that was one of them. It is now gone from PlayStation Plus, but it's coming to Xbox. Not Game Pass, sadly, but Stray is an absolutely wonderful game that went completely viral last year. I love this one. I think this is a stellar game that is much better than people give it credit for. It gets belittled almost as the cat game, but it's a huge cyberpunk city that you get to explore with a very rich lore, a very rich, deep backstory, and just absolutely stunning to look at. So much neon light, so many little alleyways to explore and rooftops to crawl over as the cat, sliding in and out of tiny windows to explore people's apartments. Stray is just a wonderful game, so if you are an Xbox player who has yet to play it, it's out on the 10th, and I highly recommend that one. Also on the 10th, Atlas Fallen by Deck 13. This is a third-person action RPG with magical combats. Nice-looking graphics, I've noted here. The combat looks quite methodical in that FromSoft kind of way, but with a dash of JRPG spectacle too. That's Atlas Fallen. On the 17th, Book of Hours is coming out. I'm interested in this one too. This is from the developers Weather Factory, who made Cultist Simulator, a game that I had a pretty intense love-hate relationship with. It's one of the most frustrating, almost awesome games that I've ever played, I think. It's a card game, a very complicated card game with timers and cooldowns and status effects. So you'll often be fighting status effects with other kinds of cards that you have to do activities to get. There is like 20, 30, 40 cards on the table in this game. And the whole story is told through cards, like a strange tarot RPG. That was Cultist Simulator, but Book of Hours is their next game, and I'm quite curious to see where they go from Cultist Simulator, which I ultimately found to be too difficult and obtuse and obscure. But I guess it is a game about cults and Lovecraftian stuff, so it kind of goes with the turf. I don't know, Weather Factory are an interesting developer, and I will check out Book of Hours for sure when it comes out on the 17th. Also on the 17th, two games that I have no intention of playing, but I know some people are quite excited about. We have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from Sumo Digital, the developers of Sackboy and Little Orpheus and Hotshot Racing. And I think this is a multiplayer game, which kind of rules me out. Also on the 17th, Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew. This is a stealth strategy, real-time tactics game set during an alternate history, and it has a pirate theme to it. And there is quite a strand of gamers who are kind of sad that there aren't more pirate games. This one, people are playing it, and I'm starting to hear whispers from reviewers that it's actually pretty good. So look forward to that one if you're a pirate fan or a real-time tactics fan. Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew, out on the 17th. On the 18th, the day after, Bomb Rush Cyberpunk comes out by Team Reptile. This one was in a Nintendo Indie World Direct. It's about skating, tagging, fighting. It has a jet set radio style to it. Looks pretty kinetic and lively. On the 22nd, Fort Solis is coming out from Fallen Leaf. This is a condensed narrative thriller set on Mars with exploration, set pieces, and a deep plot to discover, the developers say. That sounds kind of interesting to me. I didn't actually punch this one into the spreadsheet, but I think I will go and Google Fort Solis after this podcast and check that out. I like the idea of a narrative thriller set on Mars. That sounds cool. On the 22nd, a game that I put in last month's month ahead look, and it didn't end up coming out. I think it was delayed. Immortals of Avium. This is that Ghostwire Tokyo-style FPS where you're casting magic using your hands, which I think looks really good on screen. I guess it's in Skyrim as well. But it looks fast, kinetic. It's got nice, bright, particle-packed effects. I'll wait for the reviews on this one. I kind of wish this was a PS Plus game or a Game Pass game. It's one of those games that I really want to try, but there is absolutely no chance of me buying it, I think. That's Immortals of Avium. 8 more games to go. On the 24th, 3 good games come out. There is Armored Core 6 from Software. I've been watching some previews of this one. I guess everyone knows about this game. It is a revival of the Armored Core series, the first sci-fi game that From has made since its very rich run of form with Dark Souls and all of the Souls-like games and Elden Ring most recently. The previews look good. I love that the mechs have so much weight. The previews that I've watched show them really crashing down onto the ground and jetting through some really cool-looking environments. I'm quite tempted to try it when it comes out. I guess all the reviews will be good because From Software people review From Software games, so I don't entirely trust that. But I am curious about Armored Core 6. I will see how I feel about it when it comes out. Also on that day, Blasphemous 2, which I've talked about already, and Shotgun King, the final checkmate. This is a really interesting little game. I've been playing it a little bit, and it's a Game Jam winner, much like Celeste and Loop Hero and The Roots of Hollow Knight. And I love a Game Jam game that gets a full release and does well. This is one of those, and I'll definitely be talking about this more in the future. That's out on the 24th. A few more to go. On the 29th, Under the Waves comes out. This is a Quantic Dream published underwater exploration and story game. It's an exploration of grief. You play a diver called Stan who has a backstory that you will discover through the game. It looks kind of intriguing. That one's coming out for Xbox and PlayStation and PC. On the 29th, Goodbye Volcano High is finally coming out. I feel like we've been seeing this one for quite a while now. It's a visual novel about a high school band made up of anthropomorphic animals. On the 29th, Sea of Stars is coming out finally by Sabotage Studios, the makers of The Messenger. It's a pixel art turn-based RPG. You may have seen it around. It's been doing the rounds for a while. I played the demo of that one. I quite enjoyed it. It's graphically beautiful, and it's coming to Game Pass, so I'll definitely be trying out Sea of Stars on the 29th. And the last 3, on the 30th, OU is coming out. This is a hand-drawn, side-scrolling adventure. It has a a Grave of the Fireflies kind of vibe. If you've seen that Studio Ghibli production, looks interesting. I was quite taken with the graphical style of that one. And it's coming out on Switch and PC. It seems like a good game for Switch. That's OU. The last two on the 31st are Dreamers. This is a low-stakes, low-poly 3D adventure game with mini-games and exploration and puzzles. Looks very cute. It's a wholesome, direct kind of game. That's coming out on PlayStation, Xbox and PC. And finally, Tenebris Pictura. This is an exploration and ghost hunting game with puzzles set in the Victorian era. There's some top-down dungeon crawling with combat and some really cool reality warping graphics. That's Tenebris Pictura, and that's rounding out August on the 31st. So loads of good games to look forward to in the next month. I've bolded a few. I've bolded Armored Core, Blasphemous 2, Shotgun King, Under the Waves, and Sea of Stars. And I've also bolded Stray here, so I think I'm going to replay Stray. I love that game so much. I've been thinking about that environment, and I want to go back into that world. And I'm very excited for Xbox players who caught the hype but didn't get to catch the game. I'm curious to see a whole new bunch of people getting to experience Stray. And with that bumper edition of the month ahead look, it's time to move on to the first of the games in this little roundup episode, Axiom Verge. So I only played this one for an hour or so, but I had a good time with it. Axiom Verge is a beloved cult Metroidvania, I would say, and I can see why. It is very true to the roots of the series. You play as a scientist whose experiment goes wrong in a remote laboratory. The lab collapses into the ground, and you wake up in an underground network of caves. There is a strange disembodied voice guiding you, telling you that something is after you, and it directs you to pick up your first gun of the game. There's going to be a whole series of guns that you come across. It's a rapid firing laser. Much like Metroid, you can shoot it at 45-degree angles or whilst crouching or jumping, which you will need to do. There are enemies that are doing little rounds of platforms and you have to judge the right time to take them down so that you can progress. I really liked the game feel of this one. It felt great to play. You slip straight into it if you're a Metroid fan or a Metroidvania fan. Everything felt really right. It has a Metroid-style map, a Super Metroid-style map, which you will definitely need. It's a little maze-like. If lost, you can look at the map, refer to the map, and you can see breaks in the walls to show areas that you have not been to yet, locked doors, items that you may have missed, things like that. You quickly pick up a few power-ups. I liked the fast cadence that the first power-ups came in. I think some Metroidvanias hold back important moves until a little bit late, so in no time at all I had found a grenade launcher which you switch through in a slightly unwieldy fashion, but it's a different kind of weapon where you fire it once and then you press fire again to explode the projectile and hit everything that is around it. I found a drill that allows you to punch through destructible walls in that classic Metroidvania style and to access areas that were not accessible to you before. And I think this is one that will very much appeal to retro gamers. It has a very crunchy pixel art style. It has video game music of the old style that we're listening to right now. And the time that I spent with it, I think I got a good flavour of it. I had a good time with it. I do love a good simple old style Metroidvania. It's just such a classic game formula, and this one seems to do everything right. So I think I will be going back into Axiom Verge in the future. It's definitely a game for a certain mood. I played it on the Switch, and I think that's the perfect place to play it. It really suits a handheld console, and I can see why it has so many fans. Also on the Switch, I dipped into Nintendo Online. They sort of quietly release games on a fairly regular cadence on that thing, or at least they did. I don't know what is new. When I opened up the app, everything was new because I haven't looked at it for quite a while. But I went dipping into the old Super Nintendo selection and picked up a couple of games that I have not played for decades. The first one that I tried was Super Tennis. This is a game that I played an awful lot of on the Super Nintendo back in the day. Super Nintendo was my first console. It was my first Nintendo console. And I remember back in my childhood that my mum used to watch Wimbledon every single year. She was obsessed with tennis played on grass and she absolutely loved it. And we got into it too as a result. So me and my brother, we got our favourite tennis players. I was a big Andre Agassi fan. So we were supporting Andre Agassi, and then we'd go and play tennis in the garden, and then we'd go and play Super Tennis on the Super Nintendo. We played it endlessly. We played it competitively, so you can play this in 2-player. And I remember a lot of very feisty rounds of this with my brother Pete. Shout out to Pete if you're listening. We played Super Tennis to death. It's a really fun game. It's a pretty simple tennis game. You have a drop shot, you have a lob, you have a smash, and you have some basic strikes to the right or left. It's trickier than I remember, maybe because I never played the computer in that old days. The computer absolutely smashed me. I think I played 3 matches, and I only won a couple of games in all of that time, so definitely a bit rusty, but it was super fun to go back and revisit Super Tennis. It's a fun game. It made me wonder about the new Mario Tennis game that came out in the last couple of years. I haven't played a Nintendo sports game for quite a while, but they did have quite a strong run with them, and they do continue to put them out. I am building up a physical collection of Switch games, especially Nintendo ones, as they hold their value, and because there is no guarantee of Nintendo having backwards compatibility on future consoles. It is the one platform on which I do like to have physical games, because if one day Switch 2 comes out and it doesn't have backwards compatibility, then it will be really nice to have a little pile of classic Switch games that I can plug into my Switch and play. I also went and played a little bit of Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. This is a game that I played on my little red Game Boy Advance XP, which I absolutely adored. I used to carry that thing with me everywhere, much later in fact, so skipping ahead in time. I remember carrying that around when I moved to London, probably 10 years after that Super Tennis period of childhood. So I was pretty behind in my Nintendo handhelds at that point, but I went through a pretty big phase in my 20s of buying retro consoles, because back then they were so cheap. The collector culture that exists now did not exist, and so you could pick them up for almost nothing. Like as soon as the new one came out, the old ones went into lofts and attics and garages and cardboard boxes, and they ended up on eBay for nothing, or they ended up at car boot sales, and they really had no value. They were just old stuff at that point. And I remember getting my little Game Boy Advance, and Yoshi's Island was one of the games that I played on it. I played it for about half an hour this time, and it was really fun to go back into it. I think that game has such a charming art style, and I think it's quite bold what they did actually, considering the success of Super Mario World. This time you play as Yoshi, and you're carrying a little baby Mario around on you, and if you get hit, the young Mario floats away in a bubble and starts to cry, and you have a timer that ticks down, and you have to get them back before that timer runs out. So it's Mario World, but with a bit of a twist. I played this one for a short while, and to be honest, it was kind of enough. I think I played like 10 levels or something. And playing these 2 games on Nintendo's online service, it got me thinking a little bit about backwards compatibility in classic games, which has been a bit of a hot topic lately. The Video Game Foundation released an essay about how few old games are in production now, and how few games are playable on modern hardware. And I guess handhelds are kind of the exception here, because you can pick up a little handheld, assuming that the battery still works. You can open it up, you can fix them. Nintendo ones used cartridges, so the physical games still exist for collectors. But it's a whole different deal when it comes to online games, or when it comes to games that won't run unless emulated. And when it comes to console games, that not many people have a TV that they're compatible with now. I think back in my family home, I have an Amiga with all of the boxed games from that period in a box in the attic, just slowly yellowing as Amigas tend to do. But it has an RF out, if I recall. So I guess if you are committed to playing those older games, especially on things like the Amiga or things that existed before SCART and HDMI and all of that stuff, you're going to have to get a TV as well. You're going to have a whole setup for your retro games. So it is something of a commitment. And I'm glad that these games are accessible on Nintendo Switch Online. It's really cool. It's a lovely thing to have. I'm glad that there are people out there cataloguing older games as cultural artifacts. But playing these 2 games made me realise that in my own gaming life, in purely practical terms, I like the idea of having access to older games more than the reality of actually playing them a lot of the time. Like playing half an hour of Super Tennis and half an hour of Yoshi's Island made me realise that I mean, I have an Advance, I have a DS, I have a 3DS, and having access to a vast catalogue of old Xbox games, because you can buy Xbox 360 games and original Xbox games through their service, and older disc games that you can play on modern machines. It's really cool, but with so many new games coming out month on month on month, I feel like I'm running to catch up with just the churn and the new releases that come out. And it's very rare for me to have the will to commit a lot of time to replaying these older games, especially when fidelity improves and game design improves. And stepping back 10 years or 20 years, it feels like a huge regression, because I think game design today has a big fixation on quality of life, and on incorporating all of the features and advancements that have come in this kind of collective work that all studios are doing to uplift game design, to make games better, to reduce friction, to put, like save states and things like that into them. So it might not be my most popular take, but I do think that a lot of us like the idea of older games more than we like the reality of them, and we like to have access to them without actually committing to playing them an awful lot. At least that's what I see a lot of, and this experience made me think about that myself. There was a rumour that came around in the last week that Switch 2 may not be backwards compatible. It's been an open question that a lot of people have been talking about, because we all have vast Switch back catalogues and libraries, digital libraries. When games go on sale, it's very easy to just buy a few for $5 or $10 and to put them into your backlog to play later. The memory card will inevitably get full, so you end up offloading some of them. And if Switch 2 comes out and it's not compatible with the older Switch digital library, that would be a bit of a blow, There is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars of games that I have digitally that I might not be able to access anymore unless I downloaded them all onto different memory cards, which is a fragile medium. I actually watch a lot of Digital Foundry and video game technology stuff on YouTube, and I watched something recently of a guy saying that the Tegra chip that the Switch is based on doesn't have a natural upgrade path that would allow it to process games in the same way as the existing chip, and that might make it more difficult than you would think for a Switch 2 to run Switch 1 games. And it is a kind of a horrifying thought to have a vast Switch library that doesn't carry over, especially when you have a backlog of games that you've bought and not played, as many of us do. But it was food for thought anyway, that this experience of playing classic Super Nintendo games for a short time, and mostly for the nostalgia of it, it was nice to dip into them. But I do think that perhaps backwards compatibility is something that we crave, but also something that we perhaps do not employ. And I am very curious to see how the Switch 2 falls down on that, or whatever Nintendo's next console happens to be. Maybe it will just be something completely wild, like a, Wii 3 or something like that. Who knows what they're going to do next? But anyway, onwards from that ramble to the next game that I played. It's another retro-style game, actually. It's been a bit of a retro couple of weeks for me. The next game I'm going to talk about is Prodeus. So Prodeus is a game that came out this year. It is developed by Bounding Box and it is published by Humble. And it is ostensibly a Doom-style shooter. It made a bit of a splash when it came out. I saw a lot of it on social media. People seemed to be very enthusiastic about it at the moment of release, and then it kind of vanished and wasn't thought about again. I found it whilst just scrolling through Game Pass, and I thought maybe I'm in the mood for a Prodeus-style thing. I'm on a little bit of a retro-style games kick at the moment. It is a Doom-style shooter. It is 3D first-person shooter with a very, very crunchy pixel art style layered on top of those polygonal shapes. And it gave me an immediate flashback to the thrill of playing the original Doom back in the day. I don't remember what I played it on. I think I might have played it when it came to console. But I loved it back in the day. Everyone did, right? It was just something new. It was very, very fresh at the time. It's claustrophobic. It's dark. It's got that hellscape style environment, and Prodeus is very true to that. It is claustrophobic, it is fast paced and sweaty palmed, heart pounding first person shooter action in a similar hellscape. And it doesn't mess around. You're straight into the action in Prodeus. Before you know what you're doing, you've been taught how to punch. Punching and melee combat is more powerful in this than the original Doom. You can just go ham with the fists. But you're given all kinds of guns. You get your pistol, you get your classic shotgun with a really satisfying reload animation. You get chain guns and all kinds of stuff. It's extremely bloody in a way that outstrips the original Doom quite considerably. It's splattercore horror, you could say. Enemies just explode into gore when you shoot them, and if you're mowing down like a big crowd, a big mob of enemies that is charging you, it gets pretty bloody pretty quickly. It has really pumping music, and much like Doom, it has ambushes that will get your heart racing. You'll go to pick up a key, for example, and then all of the walls around you will slide upwards to reveal hordes of enemies that just come pouring into the room where you are. It's panic-inducing in the best possible way. The weapons are pretty extreme, and you get them fairly quickly. As I said, you get the shotgun and the chain gun in the first couple of levels. I did a lot of backpedaling furiously whilst demons came charging towards me, taking cover to hide from projectiles, taking down flying enemies and all kinds of crazy shit that you will see in this game. It also has that maze-like gameplay that Doom had, where you have to find keys to unlock the way forward. It has a Doom-style map as well. And there is a primitive overworld map in this game as well, so when you finish a level, you get a grading. I think it tells you how many secrets you found. You can walk across the overworld, and it looks like there are branching paths in the overworld as well, taking you to different areas. So there's an element of choice in what order you take the levels down in. That's different to Doom. And it's very much like a video game B-movie, I would say. I guess everyone in their teens, or a lot of people in their teens, I certainly did, will get into horror movies, will get into splatter movies. It's a phase that we go through, you know. Some people never get out of that phase. I came out of it and became more sensitive to that kind of thing over time. So it's not really my scene anymore, but I will occasionally dip into this kind of game. I picked up Resident Evil Village when that came out and was surprised to find that I really enjoyed that experience, actually. There's a certain kind of spectacle to it, and I think Prodeus is in that kind of box, you know. It has extreme violence, it has intense combat, and lots of spectacle to it as well. And it is so very Doom-like that later that night I was thinking, I wonder what this actually compares, how it compares to the original source material. I haven't played Doom since probably the Super Nintendo, so I went online to look at all of the Doom games because they've been ported to absolutely everything by now. And I was looking through some of the Doom games on Switch. It turns out that my timing was perfect because I think it is right now QuakeFest, so they were all on sale. And I picked up a couple of versions of Doom. The one that I ended up playing is one that I've not played before, Doom 64. This is a bit of an alt version of Doom. I'm not quite sure where Doom fans would play this in the chronology and pantheon of the Doom games, but to me it seemed very similar to the original Doom. I think it was made by a company other than id Software, who reworked and upgraded the original Doom for Nintendo 64 with new maps and very similar but improved graphics, you could say. But I have to say, it was a very stark contrast to playing Prodeus that made me realise just how advanced and slick and modernised Prodeus is in comparison to the original Doom games. Because Doom 64 was very fun, but it looks almost blank, the environment, compared to the gritty, grimy, bloody environments that you're coming through in Prodeus with light sources and secret doors and all kinds of things going on. It was more playable than Doom, I would say, Prodeus. It felt faster and slicker. It had a jump, which really helped. Doom 64 didn't have a jump, or at least I couldn't find the button for it if it did. And this experience reminded me of playing Panzer Dragoon earlier this year. That was a game that was remade for Switch. And I had not played Panzer Dragoon for 15 years probably. I played the original on a beat-up, second-hand Sega Saturn. And in my mind, whilst playing Panzer Dragoon Remake, it was a one-to-one recreation of the original. Like, my memory was telling me that I was playing basically a port. But then I looked at them side by side after I finished it and was just absolutely amazed to see that the original is blurry, pixelated, low-res, It was completely different in look to this very, very modern reworking, which had been built from the ground up. And I remember at the time being taken aback by how different my memory of the game was to the reality of it all this time later. I've just become accustomed to higher pixel counts and higher resolution and different kinds of shading and textures and all of that kind of stuff. And when you look back at the old games, they are just so very dated compared to the memory that you have of them. So I think that Prodeus perhaps deserves a bit more credit than it was given at release, at least in the wider gamer discourse. I think a lot of people struck it down and ruled it out and put it to one side as just a Doom clone. But having played Prodeus and having played the source material on which it is based, it's a profound upgrade. It's more like a reimagining and a modernization of that classic Doom format. And that's achieved very much in the spirit of the original, which I think is very, very important. Before I went back and played Doom 64, just for the comparison purposes, Prodeus definitely ticked the boxes for me in terms of how the original felt when I played it. So even if it looks like a Doom clone, it captures all of the energy that made Doom such a huge success back in the day, and it improves on it in basically all departments, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. If you are tempted to try it out, it is on Game Pass, so you can try it for free if you've got an Xbox, and if you have any nostalgia for the original Doom games, it's at least worth dipping into for a look. And after this little uncharacteristic dive into first-person shooters, into bloody horror games and so forth, I think the last game that I'm going to talk about is a bit more back on track for the gaming in the wild vibe. I'm going to talk a little bit about a game that I've talked about before, that I've reviewed way back when it first came out, called Cloud Gardens. And if you're a long-time listener of the show, you'll remember that I did a full episode about Cloud Gardens back in the mists of time when it first came out in September of 2021. This one was developed by Noyo and published by Coatsink. I initially covered it playing it on my Mac using a mouse. It suited that very well, but it does quite well on the controller. It had a Switch and Xbox release in June of 2022, and it was interesting looking at the Metacritic of this one. The original PC release doesn't have enough review scores for an actual meta score. It only got 2 reviews, both 8 out of 10s, but it did get substantially more reviews on the Switch when it came out in June of last year. It has a Metacritic of 75 on the Switch and on the Xbox, and critics were pretty divided. It was really interesting reading their reactions to this one. Pocket Tactics gave it a 9 out of 10, and they said, with a fresh take on the puzzle genre and gorgeous aesthetics, bringing a barren world back to life with plants is more fun than it has any right to be. But Switch Player gave it a 6 out of 10, and they said Cloud Gardens walked a tenuous line between being a proper puzzle game and a challengeless toy box. The result is an almost mindless and yet relaxing experience. And I think that both are right. Switch Player describes the mindless toy box experience as being a bad thing. To me, that is exactly what I love about this game. This is the ultimate chill-out game for me, and I've played an awful lot of it since I picked it up on Switch, more than I did last time even. I've been to some places that I didn't get to last time. I've found a whole new set of levels that I just didn't get to the first time around. But Pocket Tactics are right to point out that it's almost a puzzle game. It's somewhere between a puzzle game and just a sandbox. There is an objective to every level that you will get to, but that's not the focus of it whatsoever. But as for what this game actually is, it is a rewilding game, a little bit in the spirit of something like Terra Nil, although this one is less optimistic and tech-utopian and a little more melancholic and post-apocalyptic. It is set in a humanless post-apocalypse, you could say, or at least a post-human environment. Let's say that much. There is lots of evidence of people, but there are no actual people in this game. And you play a series of tableaus, just a little square of ground with a couple of structures on it, maybe like an old shed or a car park or an old factory or some disused train tracks. And they're pretty small tableau. You can turn it around. It's floating in a beautiful pastel-coloured mist. And what happens is that you'll find seeds on these tableaus which you pick. You can then plant them. But in order to make them grow, you have to drop a set number of human objects into the tableau and near the plants that you want to grow. So you will get, for example, 10 glass bottles. And if this is a lawn situation with no people in it, but a little bit of old furniture like a picnic table, you can put all of those bottles on the table, and any plant that is nearby will start to grow, and it will start to grow over the table until it starts to blossom. You can then collect those blossoms to produce more seeds. And you can rewild every area and cover it in plants. As you do so, a meter goes up. When it reaches 100%, you can click through to the next level, or you can just linger in the one that you're in if you're having a good time, as I often am, and just completely overgrow it even more until you run out of resources. So there is a puzzle element to it, in that you have to reach a target to progress, but there is no real challenge in hitting that target. And in fact, on the rare occasions that I did get stuck and failed to hit the target, I found in the options that there is a skip button for the level. So you can just skip a level if you're not having a good time. It also has a free building mode, and every time that you complete a level, you will get all the elements of that level, which you can then use in an endless mode. So I haven't really dipped into that, but once I've finished the game and collected all of the different building elements and all of the different human objects, then maybe I will. I have seen some shots of people who have really gone ham in the endless mode and built mansions and forests and all kinds of things. So there is a lot of potential there. But I find this to be just such a relaxing game, honestly. Whilst I didn't have the attention span for a narrative-led game or for a lot of reading, I was just doing little rounds of Prodeus after work, and then just go and sit down on the sofa after dinner, put on a podcast or a YouTube video, and just play Cloud Gardens. And I could happily do that for the rest of the evening, honestly. It's just a lovely tune-out, zone-out kind of game. It is melancholic. It does have that post-human feel to it, but it's also very beautiful. There is just something satisfying about seeing the plants grow and blossom. And as I have progressed further in the game now than I did the first time around, I've discovered new kinds of plants, different kinds of trees, vines that I can grow across electrical wires, giant trees that take an awful lot of resource to get to grow, but will yield a huge amount of pollen that you can then use to plant even more seeds. And you can just go and go and go in this game. I think it's a really underloved gem, so I thought it was worth flagging again, seeing as it is now out on the Xbox and it is now out on the Switch. I think the Switch is a really great place to play this, especially if you've got that big OLED screen. So I recommend picking it up. I got it for £4 on sale. I think it's only 15 or 20 for the full thing. There is many hours of gameplay to be had in this game. If you would like to hear my extended thoughts about it, there is an entire episode about it. You can go back to episode 72 of this podcast for the full review. I placed this one alongside Terra Nil, which is probably going to be in my Games of the Year list at the end of the year. I do love games where you get to grow things, not necessarily a farming game, but just a different kind of farming game, I suppose, a little bit more free form, a little bit more philosophical. And Cloud Gardens is one of those. I really hope that there is a rewilding genre. I think only Cloud Gardens and Terra Nil exist in that genre so far. But if it is a genre, then I'm absolutely here for it. I hope more people make more games of this type. And the soundtrack is just a glorious sound bath by Amos Ruddy, who did the soundtrack for Citizen Sleeper, did the soundtrack for The Wild at Heart. I think he's one of the best in the biz. So yeah, check it out. That's Cloud Gardens. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. Bit of a mixed bag this week. No focus game, as I usually do on the show. I hope that you enjoyed this little walk down memory lane, playing a bit of Cloud Gardens, playing some old Super Nintendo games, playing Prodeus and Doom and Axiom Verge. It was a bit of a different kind of gaming week for me, but I've had a good time playing all of those games. I also played a couple of others now that I think about it. I played a game called Blockbusters, which I forgot to talk about. This is a game that was made by one person in just 3 days at a game jam. Part of my work at Big Bang, the website that I work, the video game platform where I work in my day job, there is occasional game jams. I'll sometimes play through the games. It's always interesting to see what people make. But Blockbusters, it's basically a Puyo Puyo style block breaker, but it's very different. It's a bit more strategic. The blocks fall down in clumps. They are of 3 different colours. You can use your 3 goes that you get before more blocks fall to try and clear enough space so that you can scrape through to the next block fall. So you're constantly fighting this tide of blocks. And I have to say that it's not easy to make a game with that kind of hook. There is like a simple elegance to that Tetris Puyo Puyo style of game. And this one really got to me. I ended up playing it for quite a while. I was taking little breaks at work and playing it. I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes if you would like to play a simple browser game that was made in just 3 days and has a similar kind of hook to Super Puyo Puyo and Tetris. Then it's worth checking out. But that's all for this week. I hope you enjoyed the roundup. I will be back next week with a new episode. If you would like to support this show, you can do so at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. If you join the Patreon, you will help get towards that 50 patron goal that I've been working towards, at which point I'm going to do something special for patrons. You also get access to 10 patron-only episodes, and you get access to the Discord server, where we all hang out and talk games and post our Wordle scores and recommend games to each other. It's a really lively little corner of the internet to come and talk about games with a bunch of nice people. And thank you very much to all of my patrons. I appreciate you all. I'll be back next week with maybe that Venba episode finally, or maybe I will finally finish Viewfinder, or who knows, maybe I will just go further down the retro gaming rabbit hole or end up playing loads of first-person shooters. But I hope that you enjoyed this one. Take care of yourselves and each other, and bye-bye for now.